Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind, where we pursue wisdom on the paths between primary and secondary worlds. I'm Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. I recently listened to the BBC's new audio drama adaptation of Lewis's That Hideous Strength, and, well, I was excited about the potential of this production. It ended up being more or less what I expected, which is, disappointing. I wrote up a review for the Mythic Mind Substack on this, and I'll be more or less reading that for you today. And you can find that article in the show notes. And if you aren't already subscribed to our Substack, then go ahead and do that. It's a good way to hear from our broader fellowship. Speaking of which, before we get started on the main topic today, I want to make sure that you know about some upcoming things, because I don't think that I've mentioned all of this here yet. First of all, beginning on April 28th, we're going to be hosting our first free book club. Based on a patron vote, we'll be going through Augustine's Confessions, which is one of my favorite books. No experience or expertise is required here, and also no payment is required. All you need to do is to sign on as a free level patron, and you can find the Patreon link in the show notes. A little financial support is always appreciated, but it's by no means required to join us. I think that we're going to be meeting every other week on Monday evenings, but if anything changes there, and as far as the exact time goes, it's going to be communicated through Patreon. And so go ahead and sign on today, at least as a free level patron, to get on board with that. Next, I want to make sure that you know about our 3 different Mythic Mind courses that are beginning in May. I'm going to be leading A Brief History of Ideas, which is a 6-week study of Western thought. It includes 2 weeks for the ancient Greeks, 2 weeks for the medievals, 1 week for the moderns, and 1 week for the postmoderns. Because honestly, the pre-moderns are more interesting, so they get a little bit more time. It's a short study, but I think that it's going to be a meaningful study, and even more so than your typical full-term Intro to Philosophy college course. And I say that as someone who has taught full-term intro-level philosophy college courses for many years. All right, next, Hannah Gilmore is going to be leading Introductory Latin for 12 weeks. And this includes language, vocabulary, translation, Roman history and culture. And it genuinely looks like a really good time. I look forward to brushing up on my Latin as well. It's been a while since I've been very intentional about that. Lastly, Josh Traylor is leading a study on Paradise Lost. And I'll play the audio for his promo video at the end of this episode. And as a reminder, all Mythic Mind patrons get half off the price of courses led by other fellowship creators. And so go ahead, become a patron of Mythic Mind, and then enroll in every course that we have. You can find those promo codes on Patreon for patrons. And if you can't find them, just send me a message through Patreon, or you can email me at mythicmindpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll be glad to help you find what you need. All right, now let's go ahead and get to the main topic today, as I more or less read my review of the BBC's audio drama adaptation of That Hideous Strength. Oh, and I'm planning to discuss this with a few others as well in the near future, and so you can get a broader take on it then. But for now, here's my take. All right, here we go. The BBC recently put out an audio drama adaptation of C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength. This is one of my favorite books, and so I was naturally excited about the prospects here. I wanted for this to succeed. With that being said, I definitely had a degree of skepticism going into this, as the profoundly anti-modern philosophy of Lewis's dystopian fairy tale is hardly what I would associate with a major media institution, such as the British Broadcasting Network. After all, England unironically has its own NICE, that is, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. Not exactly the same thing as Lewis's NICE, but it is an interesting overlap of fiction and fact here. And in the end, it turns out that my skeptical impulses were correct. The celestial wisdom of Lewis was lost to the forces of this silent planet. Oh, and in case it needs to be said, I will be discussing major spoilers, both regarding the book as well as this adaptation. Now, to be fair, it's impossible for anyone to condense a tome like That Hideous Strength into a 2-hour adaptation without cutting out a considerable amount of content. Now, this could raise the question as to whether it should have been condensed to 2 hours, but I'll accept this limitation for the time being. With that in mind, the pacing is decent, even if it misses some of the meandering feel that's actually significant to the story. Also, I enjoyed the music transitions. I thought they did pretty well in kind of capturing the spirit of the age, but beyond that, there's really not a whole lot left for me to praise. First, let's consider what That Hideous Strength is so we can evaluate what it's for and where exactly the adaptation misses the mark. pun intended. In his prologue to That Hideous Strength, Lewis explicitly states that this is a fairy tale primarily meant to illustrate his arguments in the abolition of man. In other words, this is not a story that happens to have some points for philosophical reflection. This is a philosophical story that, apart from that philosophy, is not that story. Furthermore, this novel is inseparable from the dialectic established by the previous 2 books in the series. Sometimes people say that That Hideous Strength can be read in isolation, but I really disagree with this. Sure, the basic plot can be followed by itself, but the essence of the story is tied to the broader meta-narrative, which frames the story as a philosophical and an archetypal tale. In what follows, I'm going to be discussing a few major ways that the adaptation just utterly hollows out this story. Going back to the first book in the series, in Out of the Silent Planet, Elwyn Ransom, our main protagonist, becomes associated with the masculine, martial influence of Mars. In Paralandra, Ransom is a martial agent that is brought into relation with the feminine, life-giving influence of Venus. In That Hideous Strength, which takes place on the isolated, disordered planet Earth, the story begins with the word matrimony, thereby giving us this masculine-feminine relationship established between the previous 2 books. However, the particular marriage in view is cold and is disordered because, again, this is a story of Earth rather than of the heavens. In the book, Mark and Jane Studdock are essentially estranged, but through their individual stories, they become reconciled as they become rightly aligned with their heavenly ideals in conjunction with the jovial influence manifested in Ransom. And by the way, I tried removing the passive voice of that sentence, but it's actually really important here, because so often in Lewis's stories, and definitely in this one, the point is not so much what the characters are doing, but where they're being pulled, where they're being directed. And of course, that's going to be an ongoing theme, especially of Ransom and the company that's assembled around him, that their job is to wait. Their job is to be faithful. Their job is to receive rather than to do a whole lot. But almost any hint of this fundamental aspect of the story, this Mars-Venus relationship, in conjunction with the ordering force of Jupiter, like any hint of this medieval cosmology or this relationship between the masculine and the feminine, almost any of that is just fundamentally missing from this adaptation. Now, amidst the discordant relationship between Mark and Jane, the book quickly brings us to Mark's academic context. And it's particularly important to note that Mark is a sociologist. If this is mentioned in the adaptation, I'm not sure that it is, but if it is, then it's brief, it's passing, and it's unremarkable. In the book, however, it's mentioned on many occasions in order to drive in the point. For Lewis, sociologist is generally a pejorative term. In particular, he's opposed to sociologically driven philosophy, which is connected to his broader critique of democracy as philosophy. Lewis defends democracy as a pragmatic good for restraining tyranny, but he believes that it's demonic if taken as an accurate representation of what reality is actually like, because reality is hierarchical. Some things are better than other things. Some people live better lives than others. Most significantly, ideals stand above particulars. Sociologists, however, tend to think democratically. They'll say, here's what people believe, or here's how people act. Therefore, here's what we should view as normal. This is the same problem he has with evolutionary philosophy that says, here's what's happening, therefore, here's what should be happening. Thus, when Lewis emphasizes that Mark is a sociologist, he's telling us something significant about his character arc and kind of where he already stands in a certain relation with the forces of Belbury. Now, I'm not saying that if you are a sociologist, that necessarily means that you're on the side of Belbury. However, Lewis is making an intentional point here. And also, you might be on the side of Belbury. Furthermore, Mark the sociologist is obsessed with getting into the inner circle of the progressive element of his college. And if you have any experience with academia, you know what this circle is. As you get further into the story, you really come to understand what this circle is. Riffing off of Dante, this progressive element of modern academia is the outer circle of hell that spirals down into the National Institute for Coordinated Experiments, which is led by the likes of Frost and Wither, names that remind us of Dante's frozen inner circle. Thus, Lewis is making a very polemical point here regarding the places of power in modern academia. This entire element of the story is just utterly missing from the audio adaptation. There is not one mention of the progressive element, and it's not difficult to figure out why this may be the case. And by the way, for more on Lewis's critiques of democracy as philosophy, then you can read his essay Equality, or look up Screwtape Proposes a Toast, which is a sequel of sorts to the Screwtape Letters. Next, let's talk about Ransom. In the book, Ransom the Pendragon is this overwhelming figure who represents the priest King Jupiter, whose influence governs the relation between Mars and Venus. When Jane first encounters Ransom, she is unmade in his presence, and as she leaves that meeting, she's enraptured in his heavenly influence, and she becomes awakened to the celestial beauty in which she might participate. By the end of the story, she fully embraces this beauty as she rejects the terrestrial influence of sin in favor of the redemptive grace of God. In the BBC's version, however, Ransom is a rather underwhelming man. Who laments his crippling weakness and occasionally and awkwardly offers to pray for Jane, who remains unconverted until the end. This is not just a matter of leaving out a few things for the sake of time. This is an absolute subversion of Ransom's character and the Christianity that makes him such a profound figure. Now let's briefly discuss the main players at the NICE. First, there's the Deputy Director John Wither. Lewis describes Wither as having an eerily amicable, somewhat senile, hauntingly otherworldly presence. He's revealed to be downright demonic, to the point that it's not clear if there still is much John Wither present at all. In BBC's version, all hints of the demonic are removed. He's just an ordinary guy who happens to be a smooth-talking leader of a bad organization. Next, there's Fairy Hardcastle. In the book, her primary character is one of unfeminized, disordered sexuality, providing us with another manifestation of the NICE's rejection of the normal. Unsurprisingly, the BBC was unwilling to enter into this territory, and she too was just an ordinary woman who happened to work with some bad people. Lastly, let's consider Professor Augustus Frost, the materialist psychiatrist who understands everything in those terms. Of all the NICE leaders, he likely received the best treatment in the adaptation, although even he was considerably weakened. For example, at the end of his story in the book, he's frozen by his lack of agency that is the inevitable result of his materialism, which is, in turn, a demonic deceit. Something like this happens in the adaptation, but Lewis's philosophical critique is entirely missing. Aside from a couple of passing statements made by Ransom, the diabolical nature of the NICE's philosophy is entirely obscured, thereby providing us with an unremarkable group of villainous, mad scientists, which is far removed from the demonic progressives that Lewis gives us in his text. Finally, let's talk about the finale. In the book, the company at St. Anne's is regularly confused about exactly what they are meant to be doing. And for the most part, they're okay with that, because they trust Ransom, who in turn trusts God and his heavenly court. The one who has the greatest struggle with this arrangement is Andrew McPhee, who is entirely missing from this adaptation. As we approach the end of Lewis's story, it becomes increasingly clear that they are not really meant to do anything apart from remaining faithful. As with Babel of old, it is heaven that will smash the pride of man. Thus the forces of heaven descend upon Merlin with an act that will be his undoing and his redemption. Operating through Merlin, the heavenly powers bring the curse of Babel upon Belbury, and the NICE implodes in its confusion, which is both a curse and a consequence of their stance against the real. In the BBC's version, there is no descent of heaven. Jane, in scorn of her Venusian ideal, takes charge and hops in a car with Merlin to save Mark, while pitiful Ransom laments not having the strength to go with them. Then Merlin, apparently with his own magic, Jedi mind tricks the guards and curses Belbury with confusion. Then they rescue Mark, who never becomes a martial figure, and the story ends. Lewis's story is one of romantic idealism and philosophical critique of the modern tendencies in academia and science to forsake the real, the ideal, and the normal in favor of evolutionary whatever comes next is good philosophy. BBC missed this entirely, or, more likely, they excised it because it would be impossible to include it without the recognition that they are far more aligned with Belbury than they are with St. Anne's. Alright, that's the end of the article. Thanks for listening, and thanks to all patrons who enable the Mythic Mind Fellowship to keep moving further up and further in. We're currently up to 52 paid patrons, and I would like to thank all Tier 3 patrons by name. So thank you, Mark, Amanda, Chase, Chaz, Clinton, Aaron, Evie, Jamie, Justin, Kyle, Mariah, Paul, Tyler, and William. And most of that group has signed on with a Tier 3 annual subscription, which, in addition to the other perks of patronage, provides access to all of my courses that begin during that pay period. If you sign on now, that includes a brief history of ideas, Plato, Stoicism, Until We Have Faces, the Elder Scrolls and Philosophy, and likely one more course that will begin at the beginning of 2026. I haven't decided on what that is yet, but become a patron and you'll get some say in that. And so if that interests you, then go ahead and sign on today so you and I can both know what to expect moving forward. Now I'm going to end by providing Josh Traylor's introduction to his Paradise Lost class, but that's it for my part. So until next time, Godspeed.
Good day. My name is Josh Traylor, and I am working with the Mythic Mind Fellowship to teach some of the great books of Western literature. Coming this summer, from May 14th through July 30th, I will be guiding students through the great epic poem of our English literary tradition, Paradise Lost, by John Milton. We will be journeying through this great epic every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time during the semester. In addition to leading and teaching through one of each of the 12 books of the poem per week, I will also include an introduction to Paradise Lost and John Milton video before the class begins, as well as some shorter videos each week to help prompt discussion for class. Furthermore, I will provide recommended readings as companions to Paradise Lost, though the only required text will be a copy of Paradise Lost itself. I will also record our class discussions and provide an online forum where you will be encouraged to write questions and reflections for me and your classmates. Though there is no homework for the class other than reading the book, this is also highly encouraged for your learning experience. Before I say more, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have a fairly unorthodox background for someone teaching great books in humanities online. However, I have been an independent student of literature for many years now and am a lifelong reader of great fiction. And I've read and utilized many resources online to help guide me in this journey throughout my adult life so far. In addition to that, I am an online student enrolled in the Master of Arts in Great Books program at Memoria College in Louisville, Kentucky. Though I enrolled in this program having already read Milton, I took a class this spring called The Song of Heaven and Hell, the Christian Epic, which has not only prepared me to teach Paradise Lost to students, but has given me a deeper hunger to know and study this poem, which I am continuing to do and plan to do for the rest of my life. I also went to seminary for a couple of years in addition to my great book studies, but decided ultimately that classical education and great books and literature were a better fit for me personally. As for my teaching experience, I have taught Sunday school for adults, I've taught youth ministry, and I've taught college ministry in several churches. I've even written and taught an introduction to music theory class to a church music ministry before as well. I've also led Bible studies in church as well as several book groups for my friends, and I'm excited to utilize that experience in leading this book discussion for you all. As far as the scope of this class goes, it is meant to be an introductory class to Paradise Lost, for a range of students from those who have never read any of the great epic poems of our Western tradition before, all the way to students who have read Paradise Lost before and want to dive deeper and have a more formal group to discuss this with. I call this class an introduction because I am no Milton scholar myself. However, if you have an interest in learning how to read Paradise Lost well and discuss it with other curious minds, then this is the class for you. It nearly goes without saying that Paradise Lost is a Christian poem written by a Protestant Christian author. However, not only do I welcome non-Protestant Christians to join us for this class, but I also welcome any non-Christians to the class as well. Anybody who's interested will be welcome in this class, period. That said, since Paradise Lost is full of many rich theological themes and ideas, it must be known that these will be key pieces to our discussion each week, as this class is more about Milton teaching us what he has to say, and myself only serving as a guide, a bridge to help students understand what Milton is trying to teach us. I hope to see you this summer, and I look forward to our journey through Eden as we see how Milton asserts eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men.